All right, good morning, everybody. Today we're going to finish up the last of the notes for Chapter 12. Reminder that your media bias assignment is due tonight by midnight, so please make sure you get that to me today. Tomorrow you will have a quiz over Chapter 12. So this quiz will consist of 2 extended response questions from this chapter. So I'm going to ask you to kind of link some concepts from this chapter to some things that you've done before, just to make sure you understand how the media chapter links to the other content that you could see on the AP test. College Board may have sent you an email asking you to confirm your intention to take the AP test. I've had a couple people email me about that. If they sent you that email, just go ahead and click confirm. Some of you, if you put in your Northmont email address, you never got that from them. But if you put in a non-Northmont email address, they may have sent you an email just saying confirm. If you're still taking the test, just hit confirm on that email. You don't necessarily have to do it. They're going to make the assumption that you're taking the test unless you ask for a refund from Mr. Summer or you don't pay your bill. But that's something that they're using just to kind of track and send to the school. So if you got that email from the College Board, just go ahead and click the button that says I am taking the test, just to kind of confirm that. Okay, let's look at the last little bit here. We wrapped up yesterday. We were talking about the syndicated radio shows that you see now that are becoming more and more the norm as stations kind of get away from local DJs. We also no longer in the media have a fairness doctrine that requires broadcasters to tell both sides of the story. That's why CNN will have a liberal slant, Fox News will have a conservative slant, because they don't have to do it any other way. These stations know who their audience is, and they want to sell their stories to their audience. So if that audience is conservative, you're going to have a conservative slant, and if it's liberal, you're going to have a liberal slant. This is part of the big reason that we have so much media bias, is that we no longer require them to cover both sides of the issues. Interestingly, if you look up, Fox News' slogan is fair and balanced, and they were actually called on that several years ago, saying that your stories are definitely not fair and balanced, is that they have a conservative slant, and they basically said that, well, we are a balance to the rest of the liberal media. So they don't even try to basically say that we try to be fair. They accept the fact that they have a conservative slant, the same way that MSNBC accepts the fact that they have a liberal slant. They basically play up that as part of the reason that they draw in their viewers. However, we do have, as it relates to candidacy, what we call the equal time rule. If I am a media outlet and I choose to sell airtime to one political candidate, I must sell it to any other candidate who also wants to advertise on my network. So I can't say I'm only going to run ads for Joe Biden and nothing for Donald Trump. If I sell ads to Biden, I've got to sell them to Trump. Now, chances are, if I'm Fox News, Joe Biden's not going to waste his money advertising on Fox News, the same way that Donald Trump's not going to waste his money advertising on MSNBC, because the audiences of those networks aren't going to vote for them anyway. But it's something that they have to do if that candidate so chooses. So we do have the equal time rule as it relates to candidates. We do not have a fairness doctrine as it relates to covering both sides of the stories. Broadcasters must charge candidates for airtime, but no more than they would charge for commercials during that time. So commercials are charged based upon the time of day and the show. So these primetime 8 o'clock shows that more people watch, the commercials cost more during those times than they would cost at 3 in the morning when nobody's watching TV. So broadcasters have to charge the same to candidates as they would charge to private companies that are running commercials. Equal time used to also mean that a debate couldn't be held or broadcast on TV if third-party candidates were not involved. Now, that was eliminated back in the 1980s, so that today you can hold debates and pick and choose who those candidates are if the networks are running them as a specific network-run debate. So if you see, I know with the Democrats, they limited who could run in some of their debates. I know the last debate was Biden versus Sanders. Tulsi Gabbard was technically still in the race, but they didn't let her participate. So that used to be a violation of the equal time rule. It is not anymore. Part of the reason now is that we have a news organization that sponsors debate, and then they cover it as a news event. And that's how they kind of get around some of the loopholes of the equal time rule. However, when you're running for an office, TV oftentimes isn't the best outlet for your ads. Back in 2016, there was a guy who ran for a state house seat. His name was Bill Beagle, and he ran all of these commercials playing up on his name. He would always have a dog in his ads, and then his opponents would run ads against him, saying things like "Beagles are friends to man, Bill Beagle is no friend to women," things like that. But when you came time to vote, Bill Beagle was running for a state house seat in Miami County. So the vast majority of those people who saw that ad in the Dayton region couldn't vote for or against him anyway, because he wasn't on the ballot in their area. So oftentimes TV isn't the best outlet in order to get information out to voters, because sometimes the TV market is way bigger than the race that you're running for, particularly if you're running for a state house or a state senate seat. Now, it's obviously different for presidential or statewide candidates like governors or senators or things like that, but for local people, it's definitely not the best use of their money. When we look at TV markets today, there's roughly 200 TV markets in the United States. The Dayton TV market runs as far west as Richmond, Indiana. It runs up north of Sydney. It runs over towards Springfield, and it runs down south towards about Middletown. So that's basically the Dayton TV market. Go any farther west, you're into the Indianapolis market. Go farther north, you're into the Lima TV market. Obviously, east you go into Columbus, and south you go into Cincinnati. So we're kind of shoehorned there between three major media markets, Indy, Cincinnati, and Columbus, and one tiny media market, which is Lima. You can buy advertising fairly cheap in Dayton. So if you're running for an office in Dayton, you can get ads cheaper here than you would get them in, say, New York City. If you're running in for an office in northern New Jersey, you are technically in the New York City media market. So people who are running for office in New Jersey oftentimes don't advertise on TV because the ads are so much more expensive, and people in another state are seeing them. So even if you're running for a statewide office or a Senate seat, it's very, very expensive, and some of the people seeing your ads aren't even in your state, couldn't vote for you if they wanted to. Now, we mentioned this earlier this year when we were talking about the primaries and caucuses and why we care about Iowa and New Hampshire. We care about them because they're first, and somebody's going to take the lead coming out of one of those states, and whoever takes the lead, the media tends to cover more than the people who struggle. So we call that horse race journalism. So that's a term you definitely need to know for this chapter. And it's news coverage that focuses on who's ahead rather than necessarily focusing on the issues. So if you look at this past election season, one of the things that Joe Biden did not start out well. And the media had essentially written Joe Biden off for dead. He was basically having no chance, and they said he specifically had no chance when Bloomberg got into the race. Now, once Biden won South Carolina, then the media started to cover him more favorably, and they started to run all their stories about Biden making a comeback and all of these things. Now, same thing worked for Donald Trump back in 2016. Donald Trump was kind of a joke candidate when he announced he was running, and then he did well in those first couple states. And then the media started covering him as a serious candidate. So as much as Donald Trump criticizes CNN, CNN was really the first network that really took his candidacy seriously and started pushing him. And the horse race journalism aspect of this really kind of led that to help his candidacy, is to see the way CNN was pushing him and constantly running his press conferences and his stories and things like that. So, to answer the question we started with in this chapter, are the national media biased? And the answer is yeah. Do members of the media have political attitudes the same way all of us do? Yes. Does that attitude affect what they write or say? Sure it does. Now, does what they write or say affect what citizens believe? And the answer there is probably. What we know is that people seek out media sources that reflect their views. So if you're liberal, you're not watching Fox News unless you're watching it just to see what they're talking about on certain topics. If you're conservative, you're not watching MSNBC. So people seek out sources that meet their political views. Now, there are some people who are those moderates, and the question then becomes, where do they get their news? And are they influenced by the media bias that is prevalent in what we see? And I'm sure you're seeing this in the articles that you're looking up for the assignment that's due today, is that all the time we have bias in media. So it really depends upon what source you're seeking out as to how you're getting the information that you're getting. Now, when we look at the national media, since the 1980s, the national media is more liberal than the average citizen. There was a study done in 1992 that showed that 91% of media members voted Democratic in the elections of 1992 compared to 42% of the population. Media members are also more secular. 70% say that they never or rarely attend church. Media members are also people who think that government should help people who are financially struggling. So there is definitely a liberal slant when it comes to TV media. Now, we have seen a huge shift to the conservative side since 2008. Overwhelmingly, the media is still liberal, but we've seen, obviously, Fox News. We've seen some of these new networks like One America News that have come up that are very, very conservative. And when we look at conservative outlets, talk radio is almost exclusively conservative. There are, the same way that the TV media is very liberal, there are a handful, if any, radio talk shows that are not conservative. So the majority of talk radio today is conservative. And part of the reason for that is you think about who listens to the radio a lot in terms of talk radio. Well, it tends to be older people who tend to be more conservative, and it tends to be people who are working in certain types of jobs, and depending upon the type of job you're looking at, some of people may be more conservative based upon the jobs that they do. Now, there are more people who say that they're conservative than liberal in the United States. Many liberal people who listen to the radio tend to listen to music and not listen to talk shows. So when you talk about, and this is one thing that I really caution you on the EP test, particularly if they ask you a question about media, saying that all media has a liberal slant would be wrong. Okay, TV media has a liberal slant for sure. Radio media has a very conservative slant. So it depends upon the media source that you're looking at as to what it is. Now, websites go both ways. So if we're looking at the internet, that can kind of really go either way. Newspapers tend to be a little bit more down the middle. There's obviously some newspapers that have a liberal slant to them. There's other newspapers that have a conservative slant to them. So that's not uncommon. Most papers, if you look at something like the Dayton Daily News, 99% of the time is going to be kind of right down the middle with their coverage. They're not going to be taking on a political viewpoint there. But what we've seen is that credibility ratings for most news organizations have just plummeted. So here's our credibility ratings for newspapers, including our big ones, including local news. Those have all gone down. Local news hasn't gone down as much. Here's our credibility ratings for our TV, our big news stations. Local news is the most credible. CNN's second, and then MSNBC and Fox News both have less than 50% credibility ratings. Then we have our mainstream news networks. So when we look at shows like 60 Minutes, and we look at our nightly news channels that are on just broadcast TV, they tend to have more credibility with the average person than those talk shows, those 24-hour news networks do. And there's a reason for that. Now, if you look at networks like Fox News, they are very upfront with the fact that from 8 p.m. until 11 p.m., they're not covering news. Those are opinion pieces. So when you watch someone like Sean Hannity, or you watch someone like Laura Ingraham, Fox News does not even sell that as being news. The same way that CNN with someone like Don Lemon, or MSNBC with Rachel Maddow, those are opinion pieces. They're not covered as news. Now, you don't see those types of programs on ABC, CBS, or NBC. 60 Minutes is a news magazine, tends to cover some political things, sometimes a little bit slanted there. But ABC and NBC really don't have those. So what that leads to is that those stations are a little bit more credible than what we would see on those 24-hour news networks. Now, some terms you just need to know here as we kind of wrap up the chapter. There's basically three types of stories that the media can cover. We have what are called routine stories, and these are the things that you would expect to see. So there was a fire at a house. Media shows up and they cover that story. So that's a routine story. Basically happens every day. Typical things that the media covers. Media then have what we call feature stories, and these are things that are events that they're public events, but they're generally not covered by reporters. So and so just celebrated their 100th birthday. Um, a nurse at a hospital just did something for a patient, something like that. Those are feature stories. And they're not things that the media would routinely cover, but they are things that people might care about. Those are the stories you tend to see in the last 5 minutes of a newscast, things like that, as they kind of stick some of these feature stories in there. Then we have what are known as insider stories, and these are stories about events that aren't necessarily made public. And they can be a little bit biased based upon the subject. Now, you see some of these local stations who are trying to get into this too. Channel 7 has what's known as the I-Team that tries to investigate things that are happening in government or other places like that. Those are insider stories. They're investigating things that people don't know about. And those tend to be a little bit more biased. So routine stories, feature stories, those tend to not be biased. Insider stories can be. We then have a couple other terms in media that you should know. A trial balloon is any information that gets leaked to the media to gauge public reaction. So let's say I'm Donald Trump, and he always criticizes people who leak things anonymously. But let's say I'm Trump and I've got an idea, and I want to see how people are going to respond to it. I might have somebody leak that story intentionally, just to see what the media response is, to see what even from the conservative media, what their response to that idea is. And then if the response is negative, I can just come out and say, I never said that. That's a lie. That's fake news. That's all of these things. When you leaked it intentionally yourself. Now, politicians have done this for years, leaking information just to get a public reaction. So we call that a trial balloon. Right. And then in the media, we also have loaded language. And this is one of the things that I hope you saw in your media bias assignment, is that sometimes the words you use imply judgment. And we saw this when we looked at that survey, that survey we did in class earlier this year, with some of the good and bad survey questions. Sometimes the way you ask something can imply the answer that you want out of it. So we call that loaded language. And you see that all the time in news stories as well. The media has selective attention. People only listen to stories they tend to agree with, so the media tends to try to seek out those stories. And we know that media coverage does tend to affect candidate and presidential popularity. When Fox News began broadcasting in the 90s, support for conservative candidates increased nationwide. That was something that network definitely made an impact on. We also have the prominence of the president. You're seeing this now with Trump holding his daily coronavirus briefings. Now, oftentimes at those briefings, we don't get any new information. It's just Trump hasn't been able to hold his rallies that he likes to do. It's because he can't have crowds. So what he's doing is he's holding these daily press conferences, and he always branches out into things that have nothing to do with the coronavirus. So he'll talk about trade with China, or he'll talk about whatever. And this is because in our country, the press has a very close proximity to the president. When the president speaks, the press covers it. And the presidents can take advantage of that. They know they're going to get covered, so they're going to want to basically say what they want to say if they know that they have that venue. Coverage of Congress is significantly less. Obviously, we'll listen to Mitch McConnell, we'll listen to Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, people like that. But when the average member of the House of Representatives speaks, not a whole lot of people listen, because there's 435 of them. One person isn't super relevant unless it's Pelosi or someone in some sort of leadership position. Why do we have so many leaks in this country? Well, the Constitution allows it. We have protected, we saw this yesterday with the New York Times versus U.S. case. We have protections to the media to be able to publish what they want. So it's not uncommon for one branch of government to leak something to the press to make another branch look bad. We also have in this country what we call the adversarial press, and this is a term that you should know. Adversarial press refers to the tendency of the media to be suspicious of officials and to look for negative things to run about them. If you know that a politician has lied to you in the past, you're going to assume that everything that they say to you is a lie until they give you reason to trust them again. So the press today has a very adversarial relationship with politicians. So obviously liberal media don't trust Donald Trump, conservative media don't trust Nancy Pelosi, don't trust Chuck Schumer, and they run stories as such. They run things because of that. Now, The media also looks for sensationalism, and this is fairly new. We obviously, Bill Clinton and his affair with Monica Lewinsky was front page news for 6 months. It got him impeached. There were other presidents who've had affairs. John F. Kennedy with Marilyn Monroe was widely known. Media didn't really cover it that much because they liked Kennedy, and we didn't have these 24-hour news networks. FDR had an affair. Martin Luther King had an affair. All of these things were things that all happened, really not any different than what Bill Clinton did, but we didn't have 24-hour news coverage when those things happened, and we didn't have the sensationalism in the media in the 1930s through the 1960s like we have today. Once that yellow journalism period kind of came to an end, things kind of simmered down until we popped back up at these 24-hour news networks. Now we're all about sensationalism again. Okay, last slide here. Reporters need access to politicians, so they have to kind of maintain a balance between expressing their views and keeping that working relationship going. So you see some of these reporters, like CNN's Jim Acosta, who has a very confrontational relationship with President Trump. He's not going to get Trump to answer any of his questions. If he has a good question, Trump won't answer it. So it's something that, and if I was Trump, I wouldn't answer it either, because his relationship with him and his coverage of him is very adversarial. So if you look at some of these reporters, they have to kind of walk that line between, okay, I want to hold this person accountable if they're not telling me the truth, but I also want to make sure that they're going to answer my questions in the future. And that's kind of one of the constraints seen on journalism today. Now, last thing is there's 4 ways in which someone can communicate with a journalist. Obviously, the best known is on the record. So on the record means David Jones told me this. Okay, so you're quoting a person, their name is out there. We then have off the record, and off the record is basically you can report what I'm telling you, okay, in some context, but you're not going to quote me on it, and you're not going to give my name. So I'm just telling you something that's going to give you information. What you do with that information and follow-ups and things that you might investigate off of this is fine, but I'm telling you this off the record. You're not allowed to report that I told you this, or that you have any knowledge of this, because let's say I'm the only person on earth who knows something's happening, and I want a reporter to know about it so they can dig into it. But if it gets out that it happened, they're going to know that I'm the one who said it. So I can't give you information on the record. I have to give you information off the record. Now, reporters are oftentimes very, very protective of their sources, because if they get information off the record, they're going to do everything they possibly can to protect the information of the person who gave them that information, because they don't want they want that person to continue to tell them things. If I burn a source and I leak who said it to me, they're not going to give me any information in the future. Hey, on background is what Trump oftentimes complains about. This is where you'll see a story that says an administration source tells us, or someone close to the president has informed us that, blah blah blah. That's something that's reported on the record. Basically, you can publish exactly what's happening or what I said. You just can't attach my name to it. That's called on background. And then we have what's called on deep background, meaning you can report something as breaking news. You just can't tell anybody how you got the information. So you can't say a source close to the president or an administration source. You can't say any of that. You can run a story and say, breaking news, this has happened, but you can't report how you got that information. So that's something that on deep background doesn't happen a lot, because today in this fake news environment, we're always kind of trained today to question, well, where did this come from? Who can corroborate this story? And if something's published on deep background, chances are nobody is there to corroborate that story. So unless it's something that's significant, that a reporter feels like, okay, I need to go out with this, they're going to look for something that they can report on the record or on background. So those are just terms that you should know for this chapter. Just things that you could see that pop up in a question. All right, that's the notes for today. No writing prompt for today. Just make sure you get me that media bias assignment. It's due before midnight tonight. And then when you log on tomorrow on Wednesday, you will be able to take your 2-question extended response test. Make sure I have that received by midnight tomorrow night. Hope everybody has a great day. Email me if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.